Yo, what's the story? GoPros have insane time-lapse modes. They're all very, very different, and they have a whole bunch of different settings, which can be very confusing. However, in today's video, I'm going to take you through all of the settings that you need to know to master time-lapse in the GoPro Hero 12, and these will more or less work for all other older GoPros as well. And by the way, when it comes to just a static time-lapse, which looks really good, I've got a trick that's going to make it so much better, so stick around for that. Getting into time-lapse mode is as simple as pressing the mode button on the side of the GoPro, or you can just swipe left or right to get into the mode that you want. So in here, we got a couple of shortcuts and settings, and we're going to dive in here to what this actually all means. So if we tap this, which is a GoPro preset, basically GoPro set up a whole bunch of settings that will do different things when it comes to time lapses. So this is for time lapse, and if we press it, we can change it to stuff like vehicle lights, light painting, time warp start rails, and a whole lot of other stuff. Plus you can customize these and create your own, which we're going to get into. But let's take a look at the screen here for time lapse. First off, we can see at the bottom, this is going to be at 5.3K, 16:9 aspect ratio, and it's going to be 5 seconds in duration, as in for each shot that it's going to take, and then the lens. So down here, we have a couple of options. Besides a preset, we have settings, and then we have this little shortcut here, which is going to be for our lens. Now, all of these shortcuts will change depending on the mode that you're in, and there's a lot of settings that will not be available in one time-lapse mode to the other because I don't know, GoPro. Right, so on this one, we have linear, or we can go up to... The one thing that really annoys me is the touchscreen is still just that bit finicky on the GoPro Hero 12. We can go up here to wide. So we have two different options at wide, which is the equivalent to 16 to 34 mil, or we can go to linear, 19 to 39 mil. So if you want a wide or a little bit extra wide. For me, I like to leave it on linear for now, but we're going to get into the other changes we can make next. On this one here, we can change the settings specifically for the mode that we were in. This one here is really, really important. So when you record your time lapse, do you want it to come out as a video, or do you want it to come out as a whole bunch of photos? And then you do the work in post-production, whether it's Lightroom or whatever, and you can edit them all and stitch them all together as an image sequence. So that's one option. If it's just really run and gun stuff, I think video is really usable. It works very well. And then if we go down to the next settings here, we have aspect ratio. So this is 16:9, which is a kind of standard widescreen mode. However, 8:7 uses all of the GoPro sensor, so you can frame it whatever way you want in post-production. And if all that sounds like double Dutch, then stick with 16:9. However, it is worth taking a look at the 8:7 mode because it just gives you that little bit more flexibility when it comes to time lapses. Now, our resolution, do we want a 1080? Do we want it in 4K or 5.3K? I would say 5.3K all the way, just because it gives you that extra scope for that little trick that I spoke about a little later on that we're going to get to, which will take your time lapses to the next level. Now, if we scroll down, we have our lens option and then our capture. So this is the interval. This is really, really important. So this is going to set how often your camera takes a photo. So if it's a quick activity, if there's a lot of things going on, GoPro suggests kind of short intervals. So 5 seconds or whatever, 1 second or 0.5 seconds. So think of it like this: every 5 seconds, camera's going to take a photograph. Another 5 seconds, another photograph, then it'll stitch them all together into your time lapse. But depending on what you're doing, it could mean something completely different. Now, there's no hard and fast rules to any of this. It's just like you do what you want to do. But you can go up to an interval of every 30 minutes. Which is crazy. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing something like once every 30 minutes, you would probably need to power the GoPro depending on how long the time lapse is. I think in a lot of cases, just starting out 5 seconds is good. Now, keep in mind with time lapses, that obviously needs movement. So if you're doing clouds and they're moving slowly through the sky, really slowly, and you can see that with your own eyes, then maybe extend the interval a little bit more. Otherwise, it's going to not convey that feeling of time-lapse motion as well as otherwise. Anyway, for now, I'm leaving it on 5 seconds. Schedule capture. So we can set up our GoPro to come on at a particular time, which is really good if you just can't be bothered hauling your butt out of bed to take a time-lapse of sunset, sunrise, whatever. Anyway, so that's really simple. You dial in whatever settings you want to turn off and on. And then the duration. So it's kind of hard to judge a duration. How long should it be? I think in a lot of cases, most time lapses, if you bring them into a video, I think 5 or 10 seconds is more than enough, to be brutally honest. Otherwise, it can start grating on your audience. So in a lot of cases, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. And if we can see, as we change this down here, at this duration, your video will be about 12 seconds long. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're dialing this up or down. The GoPro is telling you exactly what you will be getting out of this. And that's based off the interval of 5 seconds. So if we bring this down to 0.5 seconds and we go back to our duration, we can see that's now changing as well. And I wish this Apple Pencil would work, in case my big fat thumbs are in the way. Anyway, so that's the way the duration works. Then our timer. So you can set a delay so you can get in the shot or out of the shot. This is really, really important. This one in particular. So we can have 3 seconds. We can have 10 seconds. So for example, if we're good to go and we set this at 3 seconds, press record, GoPro's going to count down. And then it starts doing the time lapse. Now there's a big reason for this. There's a big reason for this, and that is if you press record, then you might just bounce the camera slightly, or there might be a slightly different little bit of vibration in which can affect the first couple of shots. And you don't want that. So I would always suggest have the timer on just for the sake of an extra 3 seconds or 10 seconds. Just do it. Good best practice. Let's dive back into the settings here. And on the rest of the options here, zoom, I would avoid zoom. It's a digital zoom. GoPros don't do good zooms. Leave it at 1x. You can crop in at that 5.3K resolution. Now, on ProTune, this is kind of the pro settings when it comes to GoPros. And this is where you can kind of make a lot of personal changes, and that's going to reflect quite well on your time lapse. In a lot of cases, you don't have to go near these, but when you want to delve in a little bit more, this is where a lot of the secret sauce is. So the EV comp, the exposure value compensation. So are things going to be too bright? Are they going to be not so bright and they're going to be too dark? You can change this up to roughly about +2, which is about 2 stops over. And as you can see on screen here, it's going down. So depending on what you're doing, you might have to adjust this. You don't have to adjust it all the time. In a lot of cases, I think -0.5 works very well in a kind of a bright scenario, simply because GoPros have a tendency to overexpose things. And then if we go to white balance essentially is how warm or cool something is. So we can see on screen here, if we bring this up, our image gets quite kind of yellowy and warm. That's at 6,500 kelvins. And if we bring it all the way down to 2,300 kelvins, it gets quite blue. A lot of the time, I find you can leave white balance in auto or native, and then you can dial it in yourself. And keep in mind, we're looking at kind of cool temperatures for nighttime and star lapses and things like that, and whatever you want when it comes to warmer stuff. That's our white balance, our ISO min and max. These are really, really important as well. For me, this is kind of how bright the sensor can get artificially. So if we dial this all the ways up here, it's going to bring it up to 3,200, which is all well and good, but that's going to be the minimum, and the maximum can go all the way up to 3,200 as well. And keep in mind, the higher these numbers are, the more noise you're actually going to have in your GoPro time lapse. And we don't want noise, right? We don't want noise. So what you really need to do is keep this, in a lot of cases, 400. 800 at a huge stretch if you have to make things a little bit brighter. Then down here, sharpness. If you want your if you want your time lapses to be a little bit more, how would we say, filmic looking or cinematic, then keep the sharpness down to low. GoPro sharpness up high is very sharp. It's very medium is the same. And the fact is here, these things just look very digital and they don't look great. Now, I'm sure if your audience is on the phone watching your content, they probably won't care. But just as a good rule of thumb, keep it on low. And then the color here, again, depending on what mode you're in on time lapses, this may change. So do we want to do flat, which is quite washed out? This is helpful if you want to do your own color grading on it. Do we want it on natural, which to be fair, right out of camera is pretty good? And do we want it on vibrant, which can be overkill, but nonetheless, I find natural is good enough for a lot of cases. Or if you want to get into the weeds, flat is the way to go. And then down here, the final part of the time-lapse setting before we get into the other settings here are the shortcuts. So this is what we want to have on the left, right, up, down, bottom of the screen. So here we can have upper left. Let's say we want to bring it down to our interval. Alrighty, so set how often your camera takes a photo. So this is customizing the actual GoPro preset itself, and you customize it to what you need. So if you find you're going to be changing the interval all the time, it's probably a good idea to have the interval on the actual screen. So if we go back and stop it, we can see now up here our interval is there, and we can change that to whatever we want. So that could be a useful one to customize, but you customize it the way you find things to customize, because everybody's workflow and what their needs are going to be completely different. Next up is, let's take a look at the other settings here. Now, the idea of diving into all of the settings is the exact same. We have a couple of ways of doing it. So time warp, for example, is when you're actually moving. So if you're strapping this onto a car or a bike or yourself or whatever, time warp is a good one to select. And again, we have some options here. So let's dive into the settings, as Vic goes with the Apple Pencil. Let's dive into the settings to see what we got. And again, we have our aspect ratio. So 16 to 9 is the widescreen mode. 9 to 16 is vertical videos. So if you're on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube Shorts or whatever, then 9 to 16 is the way to do it, if you just want to do it quickly and easily. And then 8 to 7 is the full GoPro sensor as well, which is absolutely worth digging into, and reframe it whatever way you want in your editing software. Then our resolution, 1080, 4K, 5.3K. You do you, me, 5.3K. Then our lens option, you see, because we're in a different mode, we now have different lens options. So we have linear plus horizon lock, and horizon lock means that no matter what way you rotate the GoPro, the horizon is always going to be level. It's crazy voodoo, but if you're in a car, for example, like I was, it can actually make things a lot smoother, but then you might go, well, it doesn't make it as dynamic. So again, you do you. Or we can have just linear, or we can have wide. And if we scroll down back here to the capture, we can see our speed. Now this is very different, okay? We can have auto speed, which works really, really well. Or we can have 2x speed. So essentially it speeds up and stabilizes the video twice. Okay, so like 200%. Or if you bring it all the way up to 30x, it's going to speed it up 30 times. And might be overkill. I find auto is really, really good because it kind of slows up and speeds down as much as it needs. Slows up and speeds down. I got English better. And then we have similar options like the schedule capture, the duration, or timer. So you can get out of the shot if you want. As we said already, really important, good practice to have that on, or then we kind of resume. And then back into Pro Tune here. All of the options are more or less as we've explained, so I'm not going to bore the pants off you to go through all of these again. You know now what they are. And our shortcuts, options to change all the shortcuts. So that's time warp done and dusted. Now, if we go back through the other ones here, Star Trails is probably the coolest GoPro time-lapse mode that you can get. It's insanely good. It does take a long time to get a full star lapse, so you probably will have to power your camera, your GoPro, with a battery pack or whatever for a while, but nonetheless, it's really worth the effort. Just put the camera pointed at the sky, walk away, boom, done. So again, we have other options here on the shortcuts, but let's just dive right into the settings. And again, aspect ratio 16 to 9, 8 to 7. I tend to think that 8 to 7 is probably a better option for Star Trails, just because you can reframe a little bit if you need, but you do you. Resolution 5.3K. And then if we go down to our lens, we have no lens option here. It's just wide. That's it. Tough. Take it or leave it. And then the capture settings are quite different. So our trail length here, do we want to have maximum, more or less continual light trails? Do we want to have long ones, or do we want to have short? I think in a lot of cases, the long ones are really good. But if you want, for example, to see what it looks like, you can select view example, and that's what it's going to look like, which, to be fair, looks really cool compared to short, which looks not as like epic, right? And then I find my favorite is definitely the long ones, but again, you do you, so you can see what you want out of all of this. And then the shutter speed. So how long the camera shutter stays open. So if it's a very, very dark scenario, then you're probably going to have to keep it open a little bit longer. So basically 30 seconds is it's taking one picture for 30 seconds, sucking in all that light, or you can go down to 0.5 seconds, which you're probably not going to capture much when it comes to stars. Again, schedule capture, duration or timer, and then the zoom, forget about the zoom, and we're back into ProTune as well. Now there's a couple of things here in ProTune that are completely different from the other ones. Basically EV comp, white balance, sharpness, color, all those things, boom, they're gone. You cannot change these settings. And your ISO, you can bring it all the way up to the 1600, or you can bring it all the way down as a minimum to 100. Now, you got to experiment with this, try a few. I find, again, maybe at night 800 at a push, but because it's such a long exposure, 400 is pretty good. For the minimum, it should always be down to 100. So again, you got to try this out and go, okay, I need to make the ISO a little bit brighter. But for me, I would never really go above 800 on a GoPro. 400 is definitely the sweet spot before you bring in all kinds of mad, crazy noise. Then we've got our shortcuts, and that's it. So we can see our shortcuts here. For example, if you want to change the star trail length, this is the way to do it. It's just, again, you do you on the workflow. And then if we go to light painting is really cool. You can get some very different things out of it, essentially, if that's your jam. Really simple to set up. And again, we're back here. Let's go to our settings so we can take you through what the settings are saying. Aspect ratio, 16:9, the full GoPro sensor, 8:7, resolution, you know by now, Vic. And then our lens is just stuck at wide, and that's it, you can't change it. And then the trail length, okay? So you can view an example again, which is really useful. So we can see if it's at max, that's what we're going to get. If we bring it all the way down to short, that's what we're going to get. So you get a good idea. Again, I think long light trails is probably the sweet spot. And in the shutter speed, so how long the shutter stays open again, you can only go up to 2 seconds on the night shutter here on this particular mode. But keep in mind, you got to do you an experiment. So if it's light trails like it's light trails like cars and stuff moving, then probably 1 second might be the sweet spot. But again, just dig in and experiment to see what works for what you're shooting. Then you have our timer, and we're back to our EV comp here in our ProTune. White balance, sometimes I find it can work well in auto, and then our ISO min and max, it's here by default at 100 and 100. Can't change the sharpness, can't change the color for light painting. Next one up on the list, and then I'm going to show you how you can create your own custom one here, which is really, really cool. We can do our vehicle lights, which is quite trippy. I don't see a lot of use for it after you initially use it, but depending on what you're shooting or creating, it might work for you. Dump into the settings again, aspect ratio, resolution, our trail length, whether we're going to see short up to max. So we can see like here, that's a really long one. And I find the long ones, they're just there forever and they don't look great, but I think long, which is what I've been using, work quite well. And then we have our shutter, 2 seconds, and then we can see we can go right up to 30 seconds. I think 2 seconds or 1 second is enough in a lot of cases. And then our schedule capture, duration, our timer and our zoom. And then the ProTune is leave the white balance on native, ISO min and max 100 in a lot of cases. So if the shutter is going to be open up here for a couple of seconds or 2 seconds, you don't have to worry about the ISO too much unless you're in incredibly dark conditions. Still to come, we've got this insane night lapse mode. But before I get into that, let's take our standard time lapse. It looks great, right? It looks really cool, and maybe you've done some color grading to it or whatever, but it looks good. What if you want to just take it up a little bit more? It's a very simple option that you can do in any post-production editing software from Premiere to DaVinci, and that's change the scale. So an animated keyframe start at one number and start moving in slightly or pulling out. It just adds that extra little bit of dynamicism to your time lapse and make it slightly less boring to watch, because too many time lapses can be boring, but once you add movement into them, it takes it to a whole new next level. Right, speaking of next level, night lapse. by now you're a pro, except we've got an option to do photo or video. So let's take a look at the photo settings here for this, just for the hell of it. And it's the exact same, but you're going to have to stitch all these together in post. And our standard output here, this is where it changes a lot when you change to photo. Raw or standard. Now, if you're going, I'm never going to do this, standard is okay. But if you want the most out of the GoPro, I would suggest raw. The interval. So you can let the GoPro choose how often it takes a shot in this night lapse mode, or you can go 60 minutes if you want, or anything else in between. I'll leave it on auto. By now we know our shutter speed scenario, schedule capture, blah, 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 blah. Same stuff that we have seen and you're familiar with. And then our Pro Tune settings here, ISO max is set to 800. Sharpness, always bring, see what I mean? Bring the sharpness down to low, damn touchscreen. Or color, if you want to dig in a little bit, then you can leave it at flat. If you're doing raw photos, flat is probably the best option. If you're going to be going down this level, you can really dig in at flat. Sharpness low, or shortcuts, whatever we want, which we've already done. And that is night lapse, which looks really, really good. In a lot of cases, video will be enough. But you're like, okay, all of these are great, Vic, but you know what? I wanna make my own. So to make your own preset, select create new preset. And then what do we want? Star Trails night. You select whichever one you want. Do we want a video photo, 16 to 987? We can change all of these settings here. So I'm gonna go 5.3K. Interval, let's just bring it up to something stupid just to show you guys. Shutter. The GoPro 12 screen is so unresponsive, it drives me nuts, and these videos are a pain in the butt to edit because it's like stop, go. So GoPro, you hear me? And let's bring our sharpness down to low and our color, blah, 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 right? And then once we've created the preset, whatever we want, let's select the little tick up here. We can call it whatever we want. So I don't know, I'm just gonna call it custom because we can't name these. GoPro, come on, give us proper file names that we can create for a preset. And then that's it. So if we can see here now, if we go back to our menu, our custom that we've just created is up the very top. After a while, you're going to figure out what modes you do and what presets you probably need to create, which is great. This is where to do it. Now, if there's some of these, you're like, I want to reorganize these. All you got to do is press the little icon up the top, and then we can turn these off. So let's turn them all off, except one or two, by tapping the little eye symbol here. Or we could drag them up and around, if it would work, but it doesn't work. Gotta really press it in. So let's bring this up here. So we've got custom and time lapse, and then we can go back. And now if we go back to our presets, we can see we've got a lot less on. Now, if you're like, okay, I've lost my favorite preset because I followed this video, Vic, and you screwed me up, then select the little organize button here again, select reset, and then you can reset all of the presets if the touchscreen works. And all of them are magically back to the default when it comes to time-lapse. Time-lapse in the GoPro is insane with all of the stabilization. Obviously, there's a lot of settings there, but by now, you should be a pro. And if you've managed to figure these out along with this video, not only would I appreciate a subscription or a thumbs up, but this video will make you a GoPro Hero 12 ninja when it comes to the video settings.